Radio for Readers, Bookmark.
On the next Bookmark, the story of drugs, sex, and redemption. White sugar, brown sugar on Bookmark.
Bookmark.
This is a story that I spent an entire weekend reading because there's so much believability in it, it touches the soul. The story is White Sugar, Brown Sugar. It's a novel written by attorney Michael Pyle. He joins us for the Bookmark program. Michael, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
This is a book that was more than 40 years in the making?
That's true. I started writing it when I was about 22 years old, when I thought that I knew something about drug abuse and recovery and that I wanted to share it. And later I discovered I wasn't really ready to write that, but I wrote it. I had some people look at it. My stepmother told me not to do anything with it because she was afraid my father would be hurt if he saw what I was writing. And I put it down, I picked it up, I put it down, I picked it up. In the 80s, I wrote some English grammar books, which I published, and my editor read part of my book. And I also took fiction writing at University of Florida, and I worked on the book in those classes. But still, I put it down, picked it up, and eventually I added another character. Roosevelt Harris, the black character, was not in the book at the beginning.
Oh, really?
That's
it was
correct.
only Jude?
Yes, it was only Jude. He wasn't Jude, he was David. And I felt something was missing. And I was dealing with racial issues only from a white perspective. So I invented Roosevelt, put him in, and I'm glad I did because everybody loves him much more than they love Jude.
Yeah. He has a quality to him. And it's a story at a time we see the 60s, 70s, and 80s where you see racial change in Daytona Beach, Florida. And for our listeners and viewers, not only on radio but around the country who are seeing this, it gives a real, pretty much accurate picture, I think, of what Daytona Beach, Florida was like. The fact that blacks were supposed to stay on the other side of the railroad tracks, that they were not allowed to be, certainly even at the beach at night. And there are some scary moments for Roosevelt as his journey continues, where he's addicted to substance, trying to come off it, and has some near misses with the police.
That's true. Daytona Beach was like I described. Of course, I tried to picture how a black person would feel and react to that. I knew only a few. I knew Brownie, who worked at the yacht club. That's what he called himself, and because his last name was Brown, I called him Blackie in the book. And I knew the woman that I called Pearl May in the book, whose name is Eva Pearl Murphy. She's actually named in the acknowledgments, and she comes to some of my speaking engagements nowadays. And we kids who grew up on the beach side of Daytona really had no clue that there was segregation, that there was racial prejudice. We just lived our little lives. We had a few blacks in our lives, but didn't really understand. And I ventured into the black community when we would take Eva Pearl home, and later in the drug world, I experienced that street. It was called Campbell Street then, now it's Martin Luther King Boulevard, quite a bit. So I was able to write it from that.
Your life has an interesting twist to it. You started practicing law, I think, in '83.
Correct.
And you went to the University of Florida. You were studying creative writing, but you also, if I'm not mistaken, you got a master's degree and you taught English as a second language?
Yes. Well, first I was a bum and a garbage man and a drug abuser. Then I went to college. Then I got a bachelor's in English and didn't know what I was going to do. And I learned that I could begin teaching English to foreign students immediately if I started taking this master's course in linguistics. And so I did. And that's where I wrote my 3 English grammar textbooks also.
The reason that I asked that question is because the vernacular is so accurate. I was wondering if you picked that up from students and it was part of your teaching too.
Well, I worked with a lot of blacks. I worked on a garbage truck here in Daytona with a lot of blacks. I worked at Morrison's Cafeteria in Ormond, which is now Outback Steakhouse, which is what Old South Plantation Buffet is based upon. And I still know a lot of those workers also. I've met several of them even recently. And I think, though, my linguistic studies also help with being able to use the vernacular in that way.
Yeah, when they both realize, the two major characters, when it's realized that they have a problem, they know they have a problem, they approach it from different levels. There's so much truth in this novel about people who think that they can get it under control. I'm thinking about late in the book where I think it's Jude who takes a drink, a beer. It's a big deal to him. Now, I don't want to give the whole thing away, and we're going to tell folks that they can also get this on audio. Does the person who offers him the beer know at the time that he has a history when he shares one beer with him?
No, I don't think that person would know that. But even if that person did know that, you know, people who haven't been there, people who haven't studied or been involved in Al-Anon or something, really don't. It's hard to understand what an addict and an alcoholic feels and how they can trick themselves. And so even today, I have people who say to me, "Why don't you have a drink? Why don't you smoke a joint?" And I say, "I can't." And they say, "Well, you've been clean a long time, so go ahead." And they're innocent, they don't understand, and it's hard when you're in that situation to always remember that you're always an addict, you're always an alcoholic for the rest of your life.
Do you still attend meetings?
Sometimes, not very often, but I do. I've been at the same club I used to go to, which is the Almas Club in Daytona Beach. I've been there in the past year a few times.
The readers of this book are also going to learn about attending meetings, what that's like, what people say, how they still have secret lives. There's so much reality in here. Have you had much of a reaction from those people who are battling addiction, who have said, "Michael, thanks for writing this because now you've shed some light on something that perhaps people didn't know"?
I've had more positive reaction from family members who say now they understand their family member. I don't really encourage somebody who's currently struggling to get out of addiction or even out of alcoholism to read the book, because there's a whole lot of negativity. There's a whole lot of, looking at drugs like maybe it's even fun. And I could see somebody getting set off. Even for me, when I describe like shooting up heroin, it does something to me. And so somebody who's just finishing, no. But I have several young friends who are struggling right now, and their parents have read it and thank me for it. And Stuart Marchman Center, which is a local addiction and alcoholism recovery program that's been around for many, many years, and I've been involved in. The director got several copies and gave them to all of his senior counselors.
The character Roosevelt, one of the two major characters in there, contracts hepatitis, which is also common. And yet, there's a positive outcome toward the end. And again, I don't want to give it all away, but you see what he goes through and the shock that comes upon him. There's death of family members in here. But the thing that keeps coming back to me that made this such a special book, which is the reason we wanted to feature it for potential readers and buyers of this book, is it's life's lessons. These are two people who come from different backgrounds that are joined together by a common issue.
Right, and that's what I was trying to show. I was trying to show that anybody, no matter what their racial background, their financial background, their family interest, family love, anybody can end up in this situation. These two boys come from families where there's been issues. They know about the issues. They know they should stay away from this, and yet things happen and they end up in exactly the same boat as others that they thought they would never be like. And I wanted to show that could happen, and also that anybody, no matter their racial background, their financial background, etc., can recover if they use the tools and really give it some effort.
The withdrawal descriptions are something I never knew about before. I knew there was troubling aspects to withdrawal, and I've known people who have gone through it, but I never realized how it can come on in waves. Is that something, if you're coming off it, if you have a history, does it go on for a long period of time, these withdrawal symptoms?
Days.
Days?
Yes. And I guess it could be worse if you're addicted longer. I kicked 3 or 4 times. One time in the hospital because I overdosed. I was in the 1400 ward at Halifax Hospital, like something that happened in the story.
Yeah.
And it's not the end of the world. To me, I don't understand why people in the past took methadone, because to me, you can get clean. You know, it's a little effort, and you can stay clean without that crutch. And nowadays, it's Suboxone and other things that are like opiate substitutes. And I think they're just problems. If one wants to get clean, one can do it, and one isn't going to die from kicking.
As one of the characters, Roosevelt, you read about this as he learns a trade and learns how to manage in a restaurant. He goes to New Orleans, I believe, for training, and then he's to come back and run a Daytona Beach edition of this restaurant as a franchise.
Yes.
How dangerous at that time was it for a black man who was on drugs to be making his way across the South, knowing he was going to run into all kinds of people at a time that's largely around the Civil Rights Act, but even then, there are many people slow to act upon it. What's that like?
I do think it was dangerous. Florida, you know, wasn't quite the same as Alabama and some other states, but the panhandle of Florida was probably pretty close to that. Of course, he went to New Orleans twice. He went to New Orleans with Jude to do a drug deal earlier. So I think it was dangerous, and there were still plenty of bathrooms, and I remember them when I traveled around the South that, you know, had the colored bathrooms, quote, and the white bathrooms and all of that kind of stuff. I don't think that I showed him in any danger. I showed him, you know, going to get gasoline and thinking that a woman was being prejudiced against him, but she really actually wasn't. But by then it was a little bit later also. It was the 70s, I think, when he went out for work.
Okay. For historians and people who follow this, even though, Michael, it's a novel, was the greater Daytona Beach area slow or quick to desegregate?
Slow. There are cases that you can read. For example, Peabody Auditorium, when that became desegregated, was actually after some study and some attempts by some of our local people to get it done. The beach remained off limits. Other than Bethune Beach and New Smyrna Beach, it was off limits to blacks for quite a while. Well, even in the mid-60s. And even once it became legally okay, I don't think anybody really knew that it was legally okay.
Wow.
And I've done a lot of interviews with a lot of local blacks who grew up here, and I learned a lot of things about even different restaurants that carried on not allowing blacks inside the restaurants into the 70s. Seabreeze High School didn't have a black student until 1971.
Really?
When I graduated, yes. So some things were a little faster, some things were a little slower. However, Eva Pearl, Pearl May in the book, when she was at one of my talks one day, she said, and I met her, she was 16 and I was 6, so it was 1960 when she started working in my house. And she would come over on a bus. And she said to me recently, I don't remember any problem riding the bus. And I said, well, Eva Pearl, you were coming over to work. It was the morning. You went back at night. You wore a uniform. No, there was no problem. It wasn't even illegal, but it was known that blacks couldn't cross the river. You may recall Jude brings Roosevelt across the river one time against Roosevelt's will. And he says, no, don't take me across the river. I don't think I can do that. And Jude says, there's not been a law about that for a long time. But the discrimination and virtual segregation existed a long time after the actual laws were eliminated, and probably still exist in some ways.
There's a few names in here that regional readers are going to pick up first or last names and say, I wonder if he's writing about this person. One of them was Clayton. Was that by accident? I think it's his first name, but I didn't know if it might have been close to another attorney, but that's okay.
No, actually that one is not.
Okay.
I thought you were going to mention somebody else.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of others that are pretty prominent.
There's a judge whose first name is Uriel. We had a judge whose first name was Uriel. He had nothing to do with this story, but I used him. And a lot of people recognize that the person who helps the boys in the drug and alcohol rehab is following kind of Hal Marchman. I actually named him after somebody else who I admire in the drug and alcohol arena. But Hal Marchman was the founder of the Stuart Marchman Center that I mentioned earlier.
Were the police okay in the 60s and 70s? Does this reflect how police were with people of color who might be in drugs at that time?
I think so. The white kids on Campbell Street were looked at seriously. The police would often stop them. The police would watch the corner that I described there regularly because they knew drug deals were going on there all the time. And, you know, police is kind of a generic term, I guess, but there were plenty of them that were prejudiced, and I think I tried to accurately describe everything.
They both find love. They both find people to marry. They're remarkable women. I mean, they really are. At a time in which you think they might just give it up, when Roosevelt announces that he has an illness right before he's about to get married, this woman just blows me away with her reaction to him. Mm-hmm. And it's very redeeming. In other words, you walk away from reading this book, Michael, feeling really good about humanity. You really do. Mm-hmm. You've recorded this now. We're going to let viewers and listeners know that you can also get a copy of this. You did the read.
Yeah, I did. I decided I could do it myself. I could be black, I could be white, I could be old, I could be young. I don't know if I did it perfectly, but I had a good time doing it, and I think it sounds pretty good. So the audio version on CDs is now available on my website, MikePyleWriter.com, and my Mike Pyle Writer Facebook page. But I'm also uploading the downloadable version to Amazon using the company ACX. That should be done in the next week or so, and then anybody can download it through Apple or Kindle or Amazon, or there's another one also that it'll be downloadable through.
All right, now I'm going to hold this up too. I don't know if we can get a close shot, but you noticed white foot, black foot. Whose idea was it to do the cover, Mike?
It was my idea, and I tried to draw it with stick figures and have a friend who's an artist make it into a drawing, but she didn't quite get it. And there was also water in the background. I don't know if you can see that very clearly. But then I have, my daughter helps me with all of my editing and publishing, and she has a friend who also works in the publishing area, and she found this photo on one of those free photo sites and developed the cover for me.
For some reason, I'm picturing a wall at Beach Street and the Halifax River below them, because they talk about fishing and mullet and all of that. And
that was my original idea, was actually legs hanging over the wall, but
really very well done. White Sugar, Brown Sugar, a novel. Michael Pyle, our guest today on Bookmark. Michael, great seeing you, sir. Thanks so much. That's Bookmark for this week. If you have comments or thoughts on future authors, send an email to us at our website, bookmarc.us. That's our broadcast for today. Thanks for watching.